Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, the podcast for writers who strive to be bold and readers who crave something new. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I want to thank you for being here, and I want us to stay in touch. So subscribe to this podcast, then go to writingthewrongway.com and enter your best email to receive the Martian Embassy Missive, my bi-weekly newsletter where I let you know what's happening on Mars, where we're always making big plans. Join the Martians so you don't get left out of the invasion at writingthewrongway.com. And as a special bonus, I'll send you a free book. Speaking of books, my new book is called The National Gallery, and it contains sonnets about Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, elegies lamenting the death of my iPhone, and other strange missives from yours truly, the Poet Laureate of Hell. Visit thenationalgallery.ca to order your signed copy. That's thenationalgallery.ca. So I'm here with Francine Cunningham, the author of On Me, poetry collection, and also there's this kind of nightmare wind that I just want to let everybody know that sound that you may be hearing in the background is not an ambulance. It's not the apocalypse. It's just Winnipeg wind. And so thanks for talking to me, Francine. And there's a lot of things that I think are kind of interesting about you and worth talking about. But one thing I just want to kind of start with is at the back of your book, I'm the guy who reads all the acknowledgments pages in books.
Okay, I'm glad. Yeah.
And so at the back of your book, you have written here in your acknowledgments, to any Indigenous youth out there who may be reading this, you matter, and these words are for you. I hope that if you're struggling, you'll do the same and try writing about all that you're feeling. Writing always helps. I've written my way out of more than one depressive episode, and I'm sure I will again. Even if you don't think you're a writer, you are. Just try. Now, I find that it's a very kind of touching thing to put in your acknowledgments page, but I think it also is really interesting because you're a person who is not just writing that in an acknowledgments page, but actually going out and doing workshops, in the community and with youth and so on. So I just wonder if you could just begin with just kind of elaborating a little bit on that statement and on kind of the work that you do with writing workshops.
Sure. So like you said, I do go out and I spend about half my year. At this point in my life, it's about 8 months out of the year traveling around to different communities, often like isolated Indigenous communities who maybe don't always get authors in their communities, working with the youth on sort of just like allowing, like expressing their own voice and their own point of view and talking to them about why what they have to say matters. And because it's something that I truly, truly believe in. And I talk to them about representation, why it's important that our voices are representing ourselves, and that it's okay to have like a varied experience and to write about that varied experience. And I just felt like, because I've been doing this work for 15 years now, I've had so many conversations with youth, and a lot of what came out of it was like, I didn't know I was allowed to write that, or I didn't know I was allowed to say that or think those thoughts, especially when it came to their own identity. So one of the reasons I wrote this book was to sort of talk about some of the stuff that I grew up thinking that I wasn't allowed to talk about, and that to show an example to the youth that, you can talk about these things, and it's important that your point of view is out there in the world also.
Now, when you yourself first started writing, did you have some of those similar blocks that you sometimes see other people having of just not feeling? Because it seems like you kind of address this in some of the poems here. I mean, it's always dangerous sometimes to conflate, the speaker in a poem with the real, speaker of the author. But you do seem to address some of those issues in those poems to some degree. That issue of, not maybe feeling like you have the right to speak necessarily, or that your point of view maybe is not valid. So how did you yourself kind of come to writing, and what were some of the blocks that you had to kind of work around to be able to write a book like On Me?
Well, when I first started writing, I started writing as a kid, and I was writing a lot of just like fiction stories. And I mean, I didn't know what it was called at the time, but like a lot of like fan fiction type stuff. although this was like pre-internet. So I was just writing stuff. And then when I got to university is when I started to like really focus on my writing. And I joined an Indigenous writing class, only for Indigenous writing students. And it was my first time like ever really sharing my work. And I think because it was only other Indigenous people around the table, I really felt like I could speak freely. And it was so much positive reinforcement that like, keep going. And so I did, I just kept going. And then I did my MFA, to keep going. So that was just sort of like how I started it. But in terms of writing this book, I mean, I've been writing poetry forever, and that was always like, poetry is where my heart lives. It's where my soul lives, and that's how I express myself. When it comes to my fiction, I'm much more telling other people's stories, I feel like other characters' stories, but poetry is all about me. And so when I thought about this book in particular about me, I knew that this was going to be like, kind of like my introduction to the world as a writer. And I wanted to introduce myself. I wanted to talk about who I am and where I come from. Just to introduce myself, which is one reason why the book's called On Me.
What are some of the things that have helped you keep going? Because I find when I teach writing, one of the biggest issues in general for writers, whether they're younger or kind of emerging writers, whether they're coming to writing late in life or starting to write while young, or whether they're even somebody who has been doing writing for a long time, I find like consistently the problem always is keep going. How do I keep going? And even if you look back in history, I like to joke that the two keys to success as a writer are don't quit and don't die. But you can still die as long as you don't quit. Quitting really is the thing that I think a lot of writers, often very excellent writers, fall victim to.
Yeah.
And it, for good reasons and bad reasons and good reasons. So what kind of kept you going outside of the? You're saying you got some encouragement from kind of your peer group, but there's days when that doesn't do it, right? Or it just isn't enough, or they're just not there. So what is like the thing that kind of kept you going, and maybe even still keeps you going at this point?
I think like I feel like for me, there's no other option in life. I have, this is my skill set. This is what I can do. I've never been good at like math, science, history type stuff. Like that's just not my wheelhouse. And the only thing I've ever excelled at is art. And so I knew from a very young age, no matter what, I was going to be an artist of some sort. I started off really wanting to be a visual artist. And then I went into theater and I did theater training because I was like, I'm going to be an actor. And then I moved into writing. So, and even I remember my mom telling me as a teenager, she was like, okay, you don't have to focus on math and science. I don't care if you pass those or not, but focus on art because that's the thing that you're going to do in this world. And she made me like a little home studio at our house in our spare bedroom. And I was just really like focused on that. Like that was it. This is the end all be all. Like I'm not going to do anything else with my life. So I think not having any other options helps. And being like single-mindedly determined on one thing. And then I knew also with going in, like teaching art was also going to be one of the major things. Like I get so much joy and happiness from teaching, and I don't really necessarily want to be a full-time teacher. Like I like the kind of teaching I get to do, which is to go in and spend time with people and then move on. I really don't like the idea of like marking and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of set up my life to be exactly how I want it, which I know a lot of people get to say that, but I get to be a full-time writer and teach people in the way that I want to. So for right now, keeping going is pretty easy because everything's how I want it to be. But in terms of like 5 years ago, when I graduated from my MFA, I gave myself a 2-year deadline to be fully supporting myself in that 2 years as a writer. If not, then I was going to go back to school and do my PhD, which is not something I totally wanted to do. But I was like, I have 2 years to do this. And then by the end of the 2 years, I was doing it. So I don't know.
That's really interesting that you did that you like set a deadline and you had like this, clear kind of goal, what you wanted to do. Yeah. I find that people don't often have that kind of clarity of vision, if that makes sense. Yeah. So maybe, I'm sure you didn't know exactly how you were going to do it at that point, but you had maybe kind of the end in mind, in a manner of speaking. So then what did you do to kind of, as the next step when you made that goal, what was your next kind of thing that you did?
Well, I committed to being poor. For real.
It's like great. It makes perfect sense. I just laughing because that's what I did too.
I was like, I talked to myself. I was like, okay, you're going to be poor for a while, and that's okay. So that means some things are going to have to change in your life. You're not going to shop. You're not going to eat out. You're not going to do these things, all in like sacrifice of this end vision. And because I was like, I'm not getting another job. Like, I'm not. And then it also meant routine. Routine saved me, right? So my writing routine every day, making sure that I'm making time for administrative tasks, which for me means sending out queries, sending out submissions, sending out emails being like, hey, do you need someone for this? Really just putting myself in the way of like opportunities, and that takes time. And so I've dedicated time in my day to do that. And when I do get an opportunity and someone does like throw me a job or a contract, especially at the beginning, just making sure that I was like fulfilling that early, making sure that I was having a good reputation, like just working as hard as I could, because I know word of mouth is so important. And it's true, the more I started to do that, the more opportunities started to come to me. And so things got easier after that. And also, like, at the beginning, I like offered some like free teaching, free workshops to places, because I knew like if I did a really good job, then maybe they would ask me to come back, but pay me this time.
I find that it's really hard to get people to understand the importance of routine. Yeah. and have in a sense, I don't know, there's not really a good way for it, but basically of creating systems. Yeah. So, like a query system, for example, where, you're going to send out so many, or you have a process to kind of be putting yourself out in the world, in a manner of speaking, or putting yourself in front of people, or putting yourself in places where getting your, I don't know, it's hard to, it's almost like you have to create an opportunity system, I find, where like, here's the things I'm doing so that opportunity can knock. Yeah. As opposed to, and I find like people have a hard time understanding that. One, because they think of routine, especially, I think people often have this idea that somehow routine is the enemy of creativity. But, I guess for some people maybe it could be, but what I find personally is just that the more regular and routine your kind of working habits are, the more wild you can be when you're sitting down to work, because you have the freedom now to play around on the page, in a manner of speaking. Yeah. Because that structure is there outside of that. And, and if it goes badly, if I find like if I spend all day, or like if I spend time trying something different and new and risky and wild, and it doesn't work, well, I know that tomorrow I can just try it again with something else. Like there's a consistency to the effort that makes the results not as they don't matter as much in a weird sort of way. Like they do and they don't, because if it goes badly, you just can try it again. Yeah. As opposed to just like, I don't have the consistency, and therefore when I get the opportunity, it has to work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And also consistency and routine
just makes your writing better because you're practicing more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I look at my writing from even 5 years ago compared to the level it's at now, like there's a huge difference. And that's just because I've been practicing more.
What are the things that made the biggest impact for you in terms of, in that kind of 2-year period where you're just like, I'm going to make a go of this? What are the things that really worked out well? And what were the things that you kind of, now you look back and think, oh, that was a bit of a waste of time?
I mean, I don't know if anything really was a waste of time. I worked a lot. Like now I'm able to like sort of regulate more to have like normal hours. But I mean, I worked a ton. I was like 12, 15 hours working and sleeping very little because I knew I was like, I've got to work really hard. And I've got to be writing a lot. And like, I've just, and also like I was starting up like my Etsy business at the same time because I was like, I need some way, like some income coming in. And like, I was trying out all these other artistic ventures and I was painting a lot. And I was just trying to keep my art active brain constantly running. So, I mean, maybe it's not the healthiest and probably not what people would recommend, but for me, it really worked. And I don't know, I just can't, but now, I'm able to like just, slow down now and not work that insane amount and because things are kind of okay and I can just,
it sounds like it's kind of running along too. Like I find a lot of that stuff is like a flywheel is a metaphor. I think I've heard that makes sense. It's like on a hamster wheel, you got to constantly be going just to keep the thing going. But a flywheel, it's hard to get it going, but when it's going, it kind of is going. And, it doesn't take as much effort anymore after that initial, kind of effort goes in. So if you have a system, I find that's returning some level of results on a consistent basis, there'll be ups, there'll be downs, but like if I just do these things and the other thing will happen.
Yeah.
But when you're young, I feel like you just got to try a bunch of different things because you don't know what's going to work.
Yeah, no, it's true. You just got to keep going. And I just really discipline yourself. And, I mean, I don't know. I think partly it's because of my bipolarism, because I do get manic, very quick, like easily. And so at that time I was like just living in like a state of like mania, which was like pushing me and driving me. And again, it wasn't super healthy a lot of the time, but, I mean, it kind of worked a little. And I mean, like not all the writing that came out of that time was, usable. A lot of it wasn't because in that state, you're sort of thinking you're reading a broad, brilliant stuff, but you're not. But it was just like, it kept driving me forward, I guess. How
did you kind of go from, you're talking about that class. So it sounds like that class you had with this Indigenous author group where you're getting this encouragement was a big deal to you. And then you went into the MFA program as well. What other things did you do around in that period to kind of just start connecting to other writers? Because I often get asked that question of what's, the best way to kind of connect to a community of other writers. And like my answers are of limited use in the sense that a lot of them are kind of very specific to my experience, which, is not everyone's experience. And so I'm curious to know like how you kind of, now at this time, were you in Calgary? Because I spent 5 years in Calgary, 4 years and a half years in Calgary. And I'm wondering if, were you kind of in Calgary in this period or had you already kind of moved away at that point when you started to really look, because you'd gone to do an MFA in Victoria, is that right?
At Vancouver at the UBC.
UBC, okay. And then had you, so was it in Calgary when you had this writers group and you started to take things seriously?
No, it was here in Vancouver. So I moved out to Vancouver when I was 20. I did like a 2-year visual performing arts diploma up in Fort McMurray after high school. And then I moved to Vancouver to do my BA in theater right away. And then I just transitioned from my BA into my MFA. So I've been in Vancouver for, I don't even know, 15, 16 years.
And is that So then when you started to branch out and connect more to the, writing community in a larger sense, what are some things that you did and, to do that?
Well, I'm not a super like social person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go to like, the traditional things you're supposed to do as a writer. So I don't really go to readings, or things like that. It's just like, I'm just very uncomfortable in large groups and stuff. And so, basically it was just like the writers I knew or the writers I went to school with. And, apart from that, my writing community, well, I guess it was just them. I would say like the writers that taught me a lot is going to sound kind of strange, but the writers that taught me a lot were actually just the books I was reading. So I do this thing where I go through like phases. And so I'll pick an author and I'll just sort of read everything they've written in a short period of time and sort of just like get immersed in their writing and then like kind of try out their style, like just experiment. So like, I remember I went through like an Indache phase and I read like all his books in like, like a 4-week period where it was just really intense. That's the only thing I was doing. And then I was like writing and I was trying out like really long sentences, really like lyrical writing and just trying to like mirror what he was doing just to get a sense of like what he does on the page. And then, I'd switch to someone like Chuck Palahniuk and I'd read his stuff and then start writing more of like descriptive horror details. And then I spent time, I spent about a year doing that, just like switching from writer to writer in like vastly like different styles, consuming everything they did and then writing like them and then throwing it away and trying something else. And I think like for me, that was almost like my writer community. Cause I feel like I knew these writers cause I was consuming everything they'd done. And then like listening to interviews, like they were the only thing I was thinking about for like a few weeks.
It's interesting because it's almost like the way you described it is almost like kind of self-directing an intensive workshop. So it's like you're taking a workshop with Michael Ondaatje in a weird sort of way.
I mean, sure. Yeah. I guess I was just like, I don't know. These people are like masters of different parts of writing. Right. So why not try and figure out what they do?
So how did you start doing these writer workshops of your own?
I mean, it's just my personality. I've been like that forever. So before it was like to topics. So even as a teenager, I got really into like, the like actual history of vampires, for example. So I like went hard in on that for a little while. And I just have always been like that. I'll pick a thing and then I'll obsess over it and then I'll throw it away and pick a new thing, obsess over it. So I can be pretty good at trivia. I know a lot of like really random things.
How'd you get into kind of starting to run workshops for, youth and other groups? Like where'd that kind of come up? How'd you kind of branch out into that?
That's a good question.
Especially, I think, an interesting question insofar as you talk about yourself as being a relatively, not super socially invested otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like as a youth, like I was teaching like Sunday school or different things like that. And so as I got older, I just continued to do those types of volunteer type things with youth. And then I got a job at, where did I work? I think when I first moved to Vancouver, I got a job at the First Nations Employment Center. And I was sort of one of the like youth directors. So I ran like this summer program where I had like 80 youth under me, and then I would like help them get jobs and run workshops on like resume writing and that kind of stuff. And then from there, I did that for about 3 years, and then I got a job at the Museum of Anthropology with the Native Youth Program, and that was my first sort of taste at running a longer, because that was like a 7-week program with a dedicated amount of youth. And really working them through many different art forms and letting them try a lot of different things and to express their identity. And so we did like short filmmaking, just like different things. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I started to formulate an idea then of what I could do as like a workshop leader. And then because I didn't really want it just to be like straight writing workshops. And even now when I run writing workshops, I have like different kinds. So there's like, you can bring me in for an afternoon and you'll get one type of workshop. You can bring me in for a day. You'll get me a different type. You can bring me in for a week, or the ones that I do in community where I work with this organization called Empath, is that a community, so an Indigenous community will bring me there for 6 weeks. And so I'll live in the community for 6 weeks and I'll run workshops with their youth for 6 weeks. And so there's like different levels of what I can do, but they always involve more than just writing. There are always other types of visual art expression at the same time. So, unless of course you're just bringing me in for like the 3 hours, then it's going to be just a straight 3-hour writing workshop.
So what are some of the things, so a lot of the audience of this podcast is other writers. And I'm curious to know, like, what are some of the things you're kind of thinking about when you're developing, say, a workshop? Like, what's the sort of your plan, in a manner of speaking, when you're trying to put together work? It sounds to me like what you're doing is you're sort of finding a kind of topic for a workshop, and then you're kind of thinking of how you would develop it in different ways, so that, when, say you're presented with the opportunity to go somewhere, they kind of maybe have like 3 different options where they could book you, say. Is that fair enough to say? So then how do you actually go about sort of putting together a workshop like that? Like, what advice would you have to a writer who's maybe thinking about doing this kind of thing?
I would say, one, ask who's going to be attending the workshop. So if it's other writers who are professional, or like, some, like in your level of like maybe been to school a little bit, and because they want something different than, let's say, people who consider themselves writers but have never really written before, versus people who do not consider themselves writers at all and are really actually scared of writing and creating art, versus youth who, and then when it comes to youth, you got to like program for the age group. So high school is very different than what I would do for junior high, because junior high kids are much more like, yeah, let's try everything. High school students, you got to work a little bit harder at it, versus elementary kids who they're just so excited and fun, but it's a lot of like management, classroom management. So since I work with all age groups, and I've even worked with like up to like elders at like a senior center, which is again, a completely different, what they want out of it is completely different. So I try and ask, like, who am I giving the workshop for? What is their level of writing? What do they want out of it? And how long do I have? Because all of that influences how I'm going to do a workshop. So at this point in this like 15 years of doing this, I have like a bunch of workshops structured and written for different groups. Like, I have all my workshops for all these different groups already like lesson planned, and so what I can do now is sort of flip through, find the one that fits, modify it for the specific group if I need to, and then, pack up my supplies and go. And if I need to on the fly, since I've done it so many times, I can sort of like change on the fly of what I'm doing. But just starting out, those are questions I would ask the organizer right away.
So you're really starting with like the outcome that you want the students to have in many respects, or that maybe the organization wants the students to have, or you're in some combination, and then kind of thinking through, well, how do I get to that in this, span of time, and how do I engage people along the path of that? Yeah. So like if I'm working with, very specifically, let's say I'm working with a group of high school students that are in a creative writing class in their high school already. And maybe it's at the library and they have to sign up to go there, and their parents have to pay a fee for them to sign up to go there. Because that is a very different situation than you going to their classroom and then being forced to be there, right? I would do 2 different sort of workshops. So if they're coming there, that means I know, 1, they're already into it. I don't have to convince them. 2, they're probably already writing at home, so they're probably like pretty good. And so then that would means that my job is to facilitate like opening up the space for them to try different things that maybe their writing teacher has not thought of yet, and give them new different types of exercises that they maybe are not aware of, and making sure that there's lots of time in that workshop for them to actually write. So one of the things that I get told a lot about my workshops
from participants is, oh my God, that's the most I've written in months. Because like some writing workshops you go and you don't actually get to write very much. You're just sort of listening to someone talk. And I don't really understand that. Like if I'm going to a writing workshop, I want to write. So I make sure that a large chunk of my time is actually spent with the students writing.
It's really interesting because I think I just look back at myself teaching. I teach in university sometimes, and right now I'm mostly just doing creative writing in university teaching, not so much literature classes, but both in creative writing and literature classes. Early on, I was really afraid to like be quiet in a manner of speaking, like almost as if as soon as I stopped talking, somehow they're going to want me to talk because they paid money.
Yeah.
But that's not that at all. Like, as you say, like, they want space to write, or like especially in creative writing classes, I find it's a break for them.
Yeah.
It's like, this is often, not always, but often like, they're not really studying writing. And this is like a break from their normal path of study. It's a thing they're passionate about and they're maybe are serious about in some ways, but really do see as like, now it sounds like your mother was very encouraging, but a lot of people don't have that kind of encouragement, right? And in some ways, like they're looking to, you or like the workshop or teacher or whatever as like, not a surrogate parent, but as like the person who's going to give them permission, or who they just are going to get some support from, even if it's just for like an hour here.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's so much more valuable than anything else they could learn in depending on the person.
Oh yeah, like I feel like especially when it comes to people who don't consider themselves writers but are just joining up for fun. For example, if they can go in and have an emotional cathartic experience during my workshop and then have a positive connotation with writing, that it's more beneficial for them to come out than being able to say, wow, writing can help me, because maybe that's just something that they need. And I feel like writing can help so many people in art, and so if their only experience with it is in school being like told that's not good enough, you need to get 100%, then how is that helping them in their daily lives versus if they come into one of my workshops? And I mean, my workshops sometimes a lot of times, especially with adults, get very emotional, and it is like a big cathartic experience because for a lot of these adults, it's the first time in many, many years where they've been able to like express themselves artistically, and it's very emotional. It's like a very emotional release in that writing circle.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you. I mean, I'm thinking personally just a lot of this stuff recently because, again, I'm teaching these university creative writing classes, and the problem with it is you have to give them a grade. Like that's the structure. They can't get credit unless they get a grade, and there's rules around how they can get grades. And the more I do it, the more I feel like on one hand it's this incredible opportunity for people to to connect with people over in a very serious way and really get them writing in particular and really kind of move them forward into like a professionalization, which I don't think a lot of writers get in the way they should. But on the other hand, like the fact that you have to give them a grade negates so much of the experience, and it's so frustrating. How whatever it says it wants to do, the university funnels everything structurally towards this grading period. And it starts to kind of really become a problem, I feel, where I honestly have, the more I do it, the more I feel like they would get more out of it if I just graded them by weight, like how much they turned in and didn't even read it. And like I just, in some ways, just, so like it sounds like, whereas the more I do these workshops or participate them, because I go to workshops as a student myself still from time to time and so on, and I just feel like it's it's such an intensive experience, and it can be very, I don't know, like on one hand, the classroom structure is good because you're returning to the classroom every week, and there's a lot of opportunity for, to kind of be moving with somebody over a period. But you kind of are losing the intensity of an emotionalism of the workshop that the workshop offers in its possibility, it seems. Yeah. So, it's not that one's necessarily better than the other, but I feel like in some ways this kind of more intense workshopping system is an advantageous, setup, particularly for, newer writers, it seems to me.
Yeah, one of the things that I always get at the end of the workshop, no matter how long it is, even if I've been there for 6 weeks, is that they just want to keep going and they wish I was staying and that we would be continuing. But obviously I can't do that. So, yeah, I've never taught in a university before, just because that's just not where my mind is in it right now.
But you've done classes in a university. What I mean, right? Like, there's so much good about it, and then there's this other side of bureaucracy that nobody enjoys.
Which is why sort of not done that. When I would say during that first 2-year period out in the world, I did teach at it was like a Korean weekend school for students, like sort of like these students would go to school all week, but then their parents also wanted them to continue learning on the weekends. And so I was brought in as one of their creative writing instructors. So these were kids that were like 10 to 12. And we had 3-hour class on Saturday, which is a long time. And so that was me just sort of trying to make it as fun as possible since I knew it was their Saturday. But I did have to grade them, even though, their grades didn't mean anything. But it was at that point where I was like, because they were always so concerned about the grade, where I was like, no, let's just have fun with writing. And then I was sort of like, maybe this type of thing is not for me so much. I think if I were to teach in a university, I would just start the class with, all right, you're all at 100%, you're all getting A's. The only way you're not going to get 100% is if you stop showing up, and sort of like take that burden off.
I want to just switch gears a little bit and talk more really specifically about some of the book. Just because, I'm just looking at this poem on tradition. One of the things that you've got in this book that is really interesting to me is a real back and forth between, poems and subjects and kind of material that's very emotional and very, seems very personal, and also is sometimes very sad, and then jokes and like more kind of dark, even sometimes a darker kind of take on things. Like I'm just looking at, like, on page 14, you got this poem on tradition that begins, "Sometimes I get jealous when I listen to other people's stories of their traditional upbringing, but then I think they never had KFC." So to me, like, that's a great poem opening, because it's tonally like holding these two emotional spaces and kind of like crashing them against one another for like a weird tension. And it's got kind of a jokey structure to it. It's even got that classic joke structure of like the last word is the punchline. But yet it's a very serious poem that kind of is exploring a lot of kind of painful material in other respects. So I'm curious to know a little bit about how you kind of came to writing that kind of poem. Not that you do it all the time necessarily, but like what are some of the things that you find yourself doing, and how do you think you use humor?
Well,
there's a bunch of big questions, I know, but I think that's just me, and I think that it's like growing up with like a big Native family. We're constantly teasing each other. We're constantly making jokes. And they're dark, like this is just how I grew up. And so like, I think one of the very first poems in the book that I wrote was the like on teasing uncles, where it was like, I think it's just a 2-line poem in the book where it's like, what is it? It's a 2-line poem and I haven't memorized it. But it's like on uncles, and it was just like the sound
of my uncle's laugh, and his laugh was like, tss, 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 tss. And one of the lines is just the letter S. You know, he was just like this really big guy, and he'd laugh, he'd like make a joke, be like, ah, tss, tss, tss. And so like that was one of the first images for the book. And then I was like, okay, well, that's how my like uncles teased, or one of my aunties teasing is like, you know, they would say something and it'd be like, what? And then they'd hit you on the shoulder, just teasing, you know? And so it was like, I feel for me, that was like where the book started. And so I had to keep that humor throughout the book. And I mean, I didn't really realize that it was kind of funny until I started doing readings, and like people are like telling me that it is. Because I guess in my mind, it's sort of like, it's just who I am. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to like a native feast, especially in Alberta. It's like the traditional meats lined up right against the KFC. Like it's just at the table, and that's just the way it is. Someone actually made me a pair of like KFC earrings for the book.
Really?
But,
that's great.
Like little beaded things. Anyways, it's just like, so when I think about like humor in the book, that's just Indigenous humor, right? It's dark. It's always there. And at the same time, you can, like, there's just a lot of hard stuff at the same time. So I can't really envision myself writing this book without having that in there at the same time.
Can you talk a bit about the process of writing this book? Now, when I look at a book like this, it seems to me like you've written a bunch of, you probably wrote a lot of poems, then started to think about a book, and then started to maybe decide what goes in this book, and then started to maybe reorganize and edit things once you kind of had them in like the book folder, let's say. Is that more or less the kind of approach you were taking, or had you conceived of this as a book and kind of and then just kind of start moving towards making the book? Because I've done books in both ways, and I'm just curious to know where this kind of one started.
It started as a book.
Yeah.
So as a concept.
So you had a concept clearly in mind, and then you started to move into it. So,
yes.
So can you talk a bit about where the concept for the book kind of began then, and how it might have changed as you were working on it?
The concept was family. So it started off with me, like I said, like the poem about the uncle. That's literally how it started. It was like that. And then, okay, if I'm going to do uncle, then I have to do auntie. If I do auntie, then I have to do grandma. If I do grandma, I have to do grandpa. I have to do my mom, I have to do my dad. Like, and then it's sort of like, okay, well, what is this? Like, what are these things? And what is the thing that connects them? And I was like, oh, it's like an encyclopedia. And I was like, oh man, I wonder if I was to do an encyclopedia of like Cree stuff, like what would that look like? And I'm like, well, I can't really do that because that's just like too broad. I was like, oh, but I can focus on myself and my own experience. Okay. So what if I called the book like On Me? Oh, well then this part's on teasing, and then this part's on mental illness. And what are the other parts of myself that I would like to talk about? Oh, on grief. I'd like to talk about grief. I'd like to talk about identity, tradition. Like, and then I started to be like, oh, the thing they have in common is like on, like the word on, whatever. And then it sort of like started to categorize itself like that. So I sort of like thought of the categories, and then I started to think about poems that would go inside of those categories. Okay, like let's break down identity a little bit. What are the specific things that I'd want to talk about? On family, like what are the specific things about my family I'd want to talk about? And like what are the themes that connect to maybe some of the other like on topics? And then it's sort of like I use like identity as like, I think of it almost like a fish kind of like, so, or a tree maybe. So it's like the spine is like identity. And so the identity poems are like a spine that runs through it. And then everything else is sort of like branched off of that. But what I wanted was that like, so every section could be read in its entirety. It's like just that section. So if a reader wanted to go through the book, read it from start to finish, that's like fine. They'd get the full like meal, whatever. And then, but if they wanted to just read all the grief poems, they could, and that would like tell a story. But if they wanted to read like all the family poems, that could tell a story. So there was like, I just thought like I brought it thinking about like fiction, because I am a fiction writer. of like, okay, arcs. So we have the full book arc, and then we have the like mini arcs of every topic also. So that's sort of like how I structured it. I spent a lot of time on like the structuring.
So it sounds like you were almost outlining the book in a manner of speaking.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's a good thing. So I really took my cues from like fiction writing, since that's like, I would say like my main genre, I guess, would be fiction writing. So I just sort of like went up because I had worked on a novel as my thesis. And so I really learned a lot about structuring and outlining and like how to put the whole concept together. And at the time that I was working on this book, I was also sort of starting to get into screenwriting, and like I wrote some stuff for TV and stuff. And so I was sort of like taking also my cues from like what worked in screenwriting in terms of like having your outline of all your scenes first and then going back and sort of filling it in. I'm just making sure that the story as a whole makes sense. And I thought of like this book of poetry is like a story, right? It's like a whole story. And so I just needed to make sure that the whole story was there also.
It's interesting that you, see yourself as primarily a fiction writer in many respects then?
Yeah, I know. It's like people now are just like, are like, yeah, the poet.
Yeah.
But I'm like, well, actually, like if you look at like my publishing history, if it's been with like mainly fiction.
It's interesting. So. I'm kind of in a similar boat in the sense that like I primarily work on fiction, but I've been publishing poetry books. Although I believe that they're fiction books. So it's kind of like a weird thing where it's like, but it is like one of these, different people have different versions of this, but it is, I think a thing that happens a lot with writers is that there's like the thing you're doing and then the thing people see you doing, which, sometimes they match up, sometimes they don't match up. So it's always just interesting to me when like poets or fiction writers just kind of, are primarily engaged in this other thing and kind of getting categorized by people in this other way.
Yeah,
but on me, I really like the idea of like an encyclopedia of yourself as a kind of poetry book concept. In some way, I feel like that's like the hidden concept of a lot of poetry books, but now you've like made it explicit and more interesting and more of a structured thing.
Yeah, I guess. Definitely like the fear I had of like publishing this book. I'm like, who cares? Right? That was my main concern. I'm like, who cares about me? Yeah. Like, so I had to think about the question, like really think about it, like who cares? And so I was like, okay, like let me narrow my focus a little bit, which is why I did that acknowledgement to Indigenous youth. I'm like the people who might care are the people that this book could really like influence. So,
It sounds like you also, in some ways, when you're doing a workshop, one of the questions you maybe have to address is that feeling that other people have of, who cares? Why should I write? Why should I put the thing out in the world?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, even yourself, like after however many years of doing that, you still can fall prey to that trap, right?
Yeah.
It's a common trap a lot of people fall in.
I think it's a good question to ask yourself, though, because if you can't answer it, I don't know, maybe think about that. maybe like try and answer it. Like, I'm sure like you can find someone who cares, and then just instead of, I find like instead of trying to go after the entire population of the planet, that's impossible. Right. So really try and think about who you're writing for. Not at the beginning, but at the end. Right.
Well, there always, of course, even if you're publishing, a book like this, there's going to be a point where the publisher sends you a survey, and they say, and they basically, one of their questions basically is like, who would care about this book?
Yeah, it's.
So it is something that I think people. On one hand, you can think too much about it and paralyze yourself.
Oh,
on the other hand, you really should give some serious thought to it, as you say.
Yeah.
How do you get kind of outside your head enough to get the thing done, but stay inside your head enough to make it, yours in a manner of speaking?
Yeah. I just wait till the end.
Sure. Makes
Well,
sense.
because then I can see what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, if I'm in the middle of it, I can't see what I'm working on. Right. So, and also I'm a big believer in the letting things sit for a long time. Like a long time. So this book was finished for a while and I let it sit for like a year and a half. Totally finished. Just didn't want to, before I sent it out anywhere. Cause I'm like, because like you probably tell, like I get super into things. And then I can't see anything else. So I need to like, so like my next book, I've had sitting for years, like it's done. I'm just like, just waiting, like, okay, I need some distance and then I can come back and see if it's any good before, so yeah.
Now, you're also a visual poet. Do you have any plans or ideas about putting a visual poetry book together?
I have thought about it. So, cause I do a lot of watercolor. So I've thought like every place that I travel to, I write poems and do paintings in that place. And a lot of times they're places that people don't visit. So I thought maybe in like 10 or 15 years when I have enough places under my belt that I might put out a book of like watercolor and paintings from across Canada, but like small reserves and just like different places other people don't ever visit. But that's like a long-term project.
Now, if people want to see some of your oil paintings and other visual work, or even just find out more about you as an educator and so on, they can go to francinecunningham.ca.
Yeah.
So again, it's francinecunningham.ca, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on her website. And I just want to like note that to people who maybe want to look at some of those kind of visual works of yours, or we just want to find out more about you. And I want to thank you very much for talking to me. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh yeah, no problem. I love talking, as you can probably tell. Like I can just go and talk forever. So.
Well, I'm glad. And thanks very much, and congratulations on the book. And
actually, I don't know if you saw, but the book has been nominated for the BC Yukon Book Prizes.
I did hear that. That's excellent.
Which I was very excited about.
Well, fingers crossed for you.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
Great. Well, thanks very much for talking to me. And again, people can go to francinecunningham.ca to learn more about Francine, or book her in a workshop and whatnot.
Yeah, or my Instagram also. That's where I post a lot. My main platform.
Is it at Francine Cunningham as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Great. Well, thanks so much for talking to me, and keep writing the wrong way.
Thank you.